I'm Essie Cupp. I'm co-host of CNN's new Crossfire. And I'm joined by two women who bring some very compelling and perhaps differing perspectives on how to define what today's balancing act for women looks like. First, Anne-Marie Slaughter, to my left, President and CEO of New America Foundation. She made a huge splash last year with that piece, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. Sad face. And to her left, Camille Johnston, who is the Senior Vice President of Corporate Affairs of Siemens and an accomplished communications strategist. She previously worked as special assistant to President Obama's, to Michelle Obama. So thank you very much for joining us today. Anne-Marie, let me start with you. Define for us, for those of us who didn't read the piece, define for us what it all means today.
Okay. So the first thing to say is actually, it wasn't to say you can't have it all. It was to say you can't have it all yet, because we still have a whole bunch of changes we need to make if we're ever going to get beyond the standard 15 to 20%. For 20 years, we've been stuck, and to really go beyond that, we've got to make more changes. But what I meant by having it all was not having everything you want. I don't think anybody has everything they want, and I personally prefer the wanting to the having. I do better striving for things. But it was to say, it was what it meant in the 70s. It was what men had, which was you could advance as far as you could get in your career and have a family too. And that many more men still have that in the sense that they're at the top of their careers and have a family than women do. I mean, just look at the numbers. Over the past year, I've come to rethink whether men in fact have it all, because I think many, many, many men actually want more time with their families and feel they can't have it. So I think there is actually more of a balance there than I recognize, but I still think if we want women to have an equal shot at getting to the top and having a family, we got to make a bunch more changes.
And Camille, you have uniquely perhaps found a great work-life balance, which you credit to the company you work for.
Absolutely. I adopted a baby about a year and a half ago, and I actually left the White House in order to start the adoption process, because I knew that I needed both more financial resources and most likely time. Though in Mrs. Obama's world, it's very disciplined, and so you could probably have managed it if you could have. I could have managed it if I could have done it financially. When I got to Siemens, I didn't know that I would be chosen, so it was a process that you go through. But at work, they are very open to making sure that you can have a work-life balance. So I work 1 day a week from home. They gave me several months to work from home after I adopted Josephine. When you're 44 and you walk into your boss's office and say, I don't look pregnant, but I'm going to be a mother in a month, it's a shock to the system. Or maybe I did, but now that I think back, I was a little chubby. Fat and happy, right? And I got, you walk into your boss's office and they don't expect that from you. And so for them to have just said, do whatever you need to do in order to make this work for you, I'm very lucky. And it's one of the hooks that I use to bring people into the company, because it's not just for people at my level. I don't know that it would have worked. I don't know that I would have the work-life balance that I have if I hadn't done it at this point in my career, because I'd already made it to the top in many ways. And frankly, I do feel like I have it all. And I would have liked to have been both a wife and a mother in many ways. I think that is an ideal situation. But doing it on your own is something that you can do if you have the resources. And I had some good examples from people who didn't have the financial resources I did. My sister was 22 and expecting and still hadn't finished college. So at 44 and totally set financially, I don't have any issues. Josephine and I have a very simple life. It's my schedule and her schedule. That's it, right? There's nobody to say, why didn't you do this or can you do that? It's either me or her, or it doesn't get done. I certainly couldn't do it without a nanny, but more importantly, I couldn't do it the way I want to do it, the mother I want to be, if I wasn't working at a place that made that possible for me.
But Camille, what if you're not very lucky and you don't work at a place like Siemens that affords you that work-life balance? Are there things you can do internally, short of leaving for another company, are there things you can do internally to coerce that kind of work-life balance within a company that you already work for?
Well, I think one of the things that we could probably all do is be a little bit more collegial at work and respect people's choices, right? For some people, it means making it home early to do dinner. For other people, they like to drop their kids off at school. Someone doesn't want to miss a soccer game. I think that flexibility to recognize what individuals value most in their parenting and what they need at that age of their child is probably one of the things that could be done pretty easily. I didn't want to have to get to work so early that I was dropping someone off, kind of thing. I'm lucky. I'm not one of the women sitting on a bus stop at 6 a.m. to take their child to daycare in the dark, leave her there, pick her up in the dark, hop back on a bus, and get home and start the day. I am as fortunate as they get. For those women, I do think we probably need more on-site childcare. It would solve a world of problems for people if you brought your baby to the office. When I worked at Rodale Publishing, the Emmaus headquarters had an on-site childcare. The parents had snacks with their kids. They had lunch with their kids. They were there after school. I couldn't imagine a more pleasant environment for a child to be raised or for a parent to feel confident in than being able to walk across the street when your child needs you, right? I think those are the types of things, but more importantly, I think it's the attitude that we bring to work. When I was the one without a child, did I complain about the person who left early every day in order to make sure that their child wasn't left at school? I don't think so. I would hope that people aren't doing that about me, right? That if you get all your work done and it doesn't matter if it's between 9 and 5 or rather if it's a lot between 6 and 8 in the morning or 8 and 10 at night, can we be a little bit more flexible in our attitudes with how people work?
I think you've listed some of the things that great companies can do, and as a manager or a leader, my mantra has always been, if family comes first, work will not come second. Mm-hmm. It will come together. And I've always found that to be true. If I give everyone who works with me the opportunity to take care of that crisis, whatever it is, and we've all had them, they always get their work done. And they're far more loyal, right? They're happier, they're better, they're more productive, and they're more loyal. I think if you're in an environment where that is not obvious, as I think it should be obvious, there are a number of ways you can do it that don't focus so much on the parents, and particularly the primary caregivers who are still more women. One thing you can do is to talk about working differently, right? If you look at the way work has changed, if you look at the way technology has changed, you look at the way the use of space has changed, and lots of places are saying, wait a minute, why are we paying all this overhead for all these offices when in fact, if different people work from home one day a week, we can actually use space much more flexibly. Use the idea that really the cutting edge companies are working very differently. They are taking advantage of what technology allows them to do. They're taking advantage of, GoToMeeting in various ways so that you don't have so much travel. So if you think about working differently and ask how you can work differently and more efficiently given the tools we have, that often can open up a conversation. And a lot of men will also say, this is stupid that we have all these meetings all day long. We ought to be blocking off time when we're in the office and time where you don't have to be. And working from home one day a week, as far as I can tell, makes people infinitely more productive. They get a lot done on things they can't get done in the office. The other thing is to try experimenting. Right? Instead of saying, let's have this whole new policy, it's let's try this initiative and judge me on the results. Right? I've been talking to women in sales who often say, sales is actually great because there's a very clear metric. You either make the number of sales or you don't. And it really doesn't matter where you are as long as you deliver the numbers. So often what can work is to say, let's try this. And if it doesn't work, fine, we'll go back to it. But I think I can work better for you if we try this and you give me this flexibility. Let's do it for 6 months or 3 months. If it doesn't work, fine. but judge me on the results of my work, not sort of adopting a policy that many people are very nervous about the implications of.
I'm wondering if you could both talk about why, Camille alluded to this, why women are so judgy with other women about the choices that we make. Because it feels to me, women are far more judgy than men are of our choices.
Well, I think men are unlikely to be judgy vocally, though they may be judgy and just not say anything, because that would be unacceptable. Women say whatever they want, right? You know, I work with a lot of women. Public relations often has a lot of women in it. I think women do judge each other more harshly than we need to, than we should. And I think work would be a much nicer place if we helped each other along. And I know that sounds very Pollyannish, but I have benefited from working from strong women who were great mothers, great spouses, and great employees. And I think the more of us who can serve as role models for the next group that we're bringing up with us, the better off we can be. I know that when talking to women about coming to Siemens, I think I've attracted quality employees, but I've done it based on the fact that this is going to be a nice place to work. And then I try to live up to that every day. I try to help the receptionist find her way to a real position that she wants. Someone did that for me, right? My first boss in Washington, many of you probably know Lorraine Voles. You know, at 24 years old, Lorraine was also a person who recommended me for this job. So for the younger women in the audience, to make those connections when you're young, to know that you'll have those throughout your career if you work hard for that first person. I know it's Pollyannish. There's no other way around it other than to be a little bit more collegial in the office.
I agree. I agree. But women are judgy in the way that disempowered groups are judgy, right? In other words, if you look at the African American community and you look at accusations, less so now, but about how you're advancing, you know, are you actually standing up for the rights of the group, or are you sort of being co-opted? Are you collaborating in various ways that don't advance the rights of the group? That's a natural thing for any group that feels like every individual is not just an individual. They're trying to advance the group as a whole. So the reason you get this kind of judgment is I was raised to think that having a career was not just about me. It was about for the women's movement. I was standing for all women. I was supposed to be a role model. And so if you have that view that you're really trying to advance an entire group, then when individuals make different choices, the reaction is you're letting down the side, right? That's why I knew writing my article that it was breaking a taboo. You are not supposed to say what I said. I knew that. I'm not an idiot. I was raised, I knew exactly that that's the kind of thing you say behind closed doors when men aren't listening. And it's not what you say publicly. But my view was we've gotten far enough that unless we're honest about what it takes and honest about how hard it is, I mean, yes, they're fabulous super women, and all of you are them, and we've just heard from them who can have 3 kids and hold down a job and never miss a beat. And then there are all those women who you went to school with or you started your work with who are not with you anymore. And instead of judging them, we should be saying 2 things. 1, life happened to them and maybe it was harder than it was for you, and they didn't have the money, or they didn't have the family structure, or they didn't live in the right place, or they didn't work for the right people, and we should understand that and make ways for them to come back. And 2, we need to be saying, we were raised to believe that the work mom did wasn't important. The work dad did was important, and we wanted to be like dad. Well, I actually think we've tipped too far. I think that was right when we were sort of, you couldn't get into the end professions. Absolutely, we had to do that. But now I want to look around and say, wait a minute, exactly why is that? Why is bringing home the paycheck more important than turning it into love and food and care and nurture and education? Why exactly? You kind of need both to get anywhere.
But right? I don't know that every generation feels that. For example, I felt my mother was a value. I know that I was valued because she stayed home and raised me and my 4 siblings. I don't think that there was any notion. My mother may have felt like her work wasn't valued. But that wasn't how we felt. And my sisters, there's a big gap between me and the youngest, 19 years. She's 26 years old, a baby nurse for multiple births and preemies. She has 2 children of her own. I think she values being a mother because my mother was such a great role model for us. She knows what a mother can be and give. My father certainly valued my mother.
But do you think society values the people who stay home and care for people as much as the people who make the money and are?
I think that it depends on the individual, and I think it's changed by the generation, because I think there's a whole lot of women my sister's age who are stepping back and saying, I don't want to work 80 hours a week.
I agree. But then we judge them.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying, and that's where some of the judging, I think it's transitioned a little bit, because my sister saw me work 80 hours a week during campaign. She said, I don't want that.
Right.
Now, I mean, there's 19 years, I could be her mother, right? So she watched that and said, that's not how I want to live my life. And she has chosen a life that's easier to raise kids in, that's a little bit more family friendly. She and her partner are doing things, I don't know what the rest, a little bit slower. Yeah. They're taking a slower pace at life. And that, to me, it's what made them happy and what made it possible at 26 years old to raise 2 kids and work.
But I totally agree with you. And one reason my article exploded was because the younger women were looking for different paths. Mm-hmm. But then the women my generation and older say, that's undermining the women's movement.
Yes.
Those women are no longer doing what we want them to do. They are supposed to be out there. They're supposed to be, if they don't live up to the kind of work schedules we had, what did we sacrifice for?
Well, that's where the judgy part comes in, right? We're judging, and I'm the generation in the middle. I benefited from having people pave the way for me, and I can respect what my 26-year-old sister doesn't want to live her life that way. And so I think as the kind of the balancing act, you need to support the young people, because now I'm their manager, right? I need to find a way for her to get back into the workforce, and respect the fact that I'm only where I am because people did it for me. So I guess this middle range, the 40 to 45-year-old kind of thing, you have to see it both ways. But I think you're right. But that's where the judgy part came in, right? As we were all judging Anne-Marie.
But I always start speeches often by saying, every single woman in this room owes an unbelievable debt to the women 10 years ahead of me. Mm-hmm. Because I came out of college in 1980 and didn't know a single woman doctor. I knew one woman lawyer. The idea, women members of Congress, judges, Secretary of State, you had to be kidding. And 10 years later, by 1990, when I was looking for a law teaching job, law schools were actively looking for women law teachers. So those women, and it's really 10 years ahead of me, they are the ones who broke those ceilings, who had to act more like men than men often, and who made huge sacrifices. And I think it helps if we start by acknowledging that and then saying, but when you make a revolution, you have to accept that the people who come after you are going to see things a little different.
And I was the one that graduated in 90. So I saw the results, right? And so I accepted them as fact. Yep. And we still need to work harder for those.
Let me ask, you both talked about finding mentors and having role models, but I hope you can also talk to the idea of being a mentor. And I usually encourage young women to be a mentor at 26. You don't have to be completely accomplished in your job to be a role model to someone else. How would you encourage people of any age and any status to be a role model and a mentor to someone?
Well, I mean, I don't actually like the formal mentee-mentor role that companies kind of apply within the workplace. If you don't actually work with someone, I think it's very hard. You can be a good listener, you can help them through a situation, but I don't see that as the mentee-mentor. I think when you hire young people, you need to help them get to the next point in their career. Oftentimes you see assistants who are still assistants 3 and 5 years later because it's too hard to let them go because your life will be made a little bit more difficult, right?
Absolutely.
And so what we need to do is help them on their career path, recognizing that after 2 or 3 years, if they're very good, graduate them into a job and help them find that for yourself and for them. The next person will bring something new to your life and move on. For the 26-year-old, I think it's very hard to be not hard to be a role model, hard to be a mentor, I think, at 26 years old. I think at that point you can be a good listener and you can be a good employee, but I wouldn't have been a good mentor at 26, I don't think.
I agree with that. A mentor in the first place is someone who knows your value. I mean, Sheryl Sandberg is exactly right when she says, people come up to her and say, will you be my mentor? Like the duck, are you my mother? And she says, look, I have no idea what you're like, how good you are. I can't, recommend you for something else if you haven't, proved yourself to me. And I think that's right. There's a kind of expectation that's been built that an older woman is supposed to kind of advance a younger woman because they're both women. I think that older woman absolutely ought to be trying to tell the tricks of the trade, to sort of help in various ways, to give information. But mentoring is a much more personal relationship, and most of my mentors have been men. I've had some fabulous women mentors, but I've really had some incredible men, and it's come as I've worked for them. They've, thought what I did was valuable, and they've actually then pushed me and recommended me. What Sylvia Hewitt calls a sponsor rather than a mentor. So I do think we've sort of it's gotten a little out of whack that the idea that you can find a mentor. Basically, you want to do a really great job, and I agree with you, Camille, that the job of any good manager is to look at somebody's career in their terms rather than in your terms. And in this town in particular, I spend a lot of time telling people, you've gotten where you've gotten because you are a staff member to a powerful person. But it's time for you to be your own principal, right? You have to now you've got to convert that, work into a job that makes you a principal, so that instead of being the special assistant all the way up, you become a deputy assistant secretary or something like that. Because this town, otherwise, yes, we all need talented help, and it's hard to let go. But for the person, you really need to think about what it looks like from their perspective.
One of the women I worked for was Gore, and she told me something that was very valuable. She said, don't work harder for someone else's dreams than you'd work for your own. Exactly. And in this town, it's very easy to get caught up in the fact that you're working for this person. But that is ultimately their dream. And that's one of the reasons that when I left the White House when I did, I knew I wanted to be a mother more than I wanted to work in the White House a second time, right? It was my choice. It was how I knew I needed in order to make my life work. And that rings true because you can get caught up in where you work and who you work for without thinking through, is this what I want in the end?
Right. You mentioned Sheryl Sandberg. I was hoping to get both of your thoughts on her lean in mantra. If you could talk about that a little bit.
I've never been asked that question.
Gee.
Never thought that'd come up. First place, I tell everybody to read Lean In. I think it's got a tremendous amount in it that is really right. It is it's kind of what you need to do in a very male world. I still hope we're going to be able to make some changes so that not all of that is necessary, but I recognize right now it still is. I think it is great as far as it goes. My difference, and it's not a critique, is it's the book I would have written at 43. Because at 43, which is how old Sheryl Sandberg is, I had never hit a situation that I could not pay more or work harder to get out of. I could either buy something, get somebody else to help me, outsource something, or I could just work harder and I could make it go. in my early 50s, as I told them, when I came to Washington and I had a kid who was a teenager, and it's a whole different ballgame, right? It's not about them crying when you leave, it's about them not wanting to see you when you come home. It's a totally different thing. And at that point, I couldn't outsource that. Quite the contrary. It had to be me. It had to be me and my husband. And no amount of working harder, I was in 2 different places. And Hillary Clinton was fabulous. She did everything she could, but she needed me to do what she hired me to do. I expected that of her. So my point is, Sheryl Sandberg, I think, has done a great thing by being very honest and by telling people what it takes to get to where she is. But what I want us again to think about is all those people who've had a life situation. What if you have a kid with special needs? What if you get divorced and your husband moves and you've got a custody thing? What if your mother's no longer there to help you out? There are so many ways in which leaning in is not going to make the difference. You're going to have to make a different arrangement. And what I think we need to do is A, understand that, B, make room for it, and C, most importantly, recognize that the 22-year-olds in this room, if there are any, but if you have a 22-year-old woman who is well-educated, has a life expectancy of 86. So a third of those women are going to live to 100. There is plenty of room to have time to be a mother, to be a daughter, right? To take care of your parents as well, or be with them as well as your children, and still have time to succeed. If we simply get rid of this notion that there's one ladder, and if you're not up, you're out. Instead, Sheryl says it's a jungle gym, I think it's interval training, right? Where you work really hard for a while, and then you slack off for a while, and you work really hard. And I expect to be doing something, I hope, very important at 70 or 75. And, knock wood, you can't control it. There's no reason we shouldn't have a society that allows that.
Camille, we've got a minute left. Do you want to briefly respond?
Well, it's a little judgy, right? Women are hard on women. And I think it's unfortunate because she's actually talking to a pretty narrow group. And the book was examined under the microscope of so many other scenarios for people. And so I think if we look at the whole spectrum, the women in this group here are probably more about who she spoke to at a younger age. This is a pretty finite group of people. And if we look at the world from the much larger lens of the women who don't have the choices we have, who don't have the education we have, who don't have the job experience or the family support, who don't have the childcare, who don't have these things, and look at the whole, then we'd probably be a little more compassionate and a little bit more flexible in what we expect from them at work.
Well, thank you both, Anne Marie Slaughter and Camille Johnston, for joining us.